After my mom passed, I reached out to Joan, our family friend for 26 years, but she seemed only interested in her needs. "I'm busy," I told her while my daughter was sick. Joan hung up without asking if we were okay. Now, I'm questioning if going no contact makes me the villain. I have, without making the decision directly myself, gone no contact with a family friend, let us refer to her as Joan, who has been a part of my life since 1999, when I was 9 or 10 years old. To provide some background for clarity, Joan met my mother while they were both mature students in college. I cannot recall if they were in the same course at that time or if it was in the previous year. If it were the previous year, my mother was studying conservation, while Joan, who would later become a family friend, was studying animal care. If it were the next year, my mother had switched to studying animal care as well. They developed a close friendship. Joan would occasionally help my mother financially when she was in a difficult situation. My mother would assist Joan with her animals on her small holding and, of course, attempt to pay back any borrowed money, though Joan would often refuse to accept it. At one point, there was a falling out between them for reasons I do not know, and they did not speak for about a year. During that time, my mother, sister, and I moved from Scotland to England. I encouraged my mother to reach out to Joan. I never inquired about the reasons for their disagreement, as that was not my place. My mother did reach out, and they rekindled their friendship. Fast forward a few years, and we had moved again, still in the same area when Joan's husband passed away. She started to struggle financially, given the loss of his income, and decided she needed to downsize. My mother, not really thinking she would take it seriously, suggested, "Oh, maybe you should move down here." To her surprise, Joan took that suggestion to heart. When Joan asked us to help find her a place to live, my mother didn't want her in the same village, believing it would be too much. We took it upon ourselves to assist. Joan can be quite overwhelming at times, though it is worth noting that she is Swedish. I was responsible for searching for houses within her budget, sending her options, and she then decided which ones she wanted us to look at. We viewed houses in the next village over, within walking distance, shared our impressions, and ultimately, she chose one and purchased it outright. I am now approaching the actual point, so please bear with me. We helped her collect keys, met her upon her arrival, and assisted her in settling in. Her dog, a border collie, jumped up at me excitedly and tore one of my favorite tops, which made Joan laugh. Every Christmas, Joan was invited to our home. However, Joan never invited my mother to her annual Christmas party, which she would rave about for months after. They did not exchange presents, as this was not the nature of their friendship. This detail becomes important later. My mother would walk to Joan's house, and I often accompanied her. Joan is humorous and a good host. She usually insisted on feeding us, and refusing was never an option. She only came to our home for Christmas dinner and would stay for about half an hour before leaving. She always insisted that we drink alcohol, even though we do not typically have alcohol with our Christmas dinner. We would drink orange juice or tropical juice. We would visit her on Christmas Eve for the traditional Swedish Christmas, which was always delightful, but again, she would ply us with sparkling wine and schnapps. Despite our rare drinking habits, the last time I drank with my mother, we did not even finish a glass each. After these events, we would return home slightly inebriated. My mother had an autoimmune condition that affected her joints. I will not specify which condition, as that is unimportant. All you need to know is that it made a 1.5-mile walk challenging. My sister avoided this situation by staying home to take care of our dogs, especially our foster dog, who required medication at specific times. This arrangement went on for nearly a decade. At one point, Joan was hospitalized. The reasons are not significant, and she remained in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. My mother visited her and then went to Joan's house twice daily to care for her animals, dogs, cats, and birds. I could see my mother becoming exhausted, which exacerbated her health condition. Although my mother would not voice her concerns, she was incredibly kind and helpful. I eventually told her that enough was enough. She had thanked Joan once, but Joan seemed unable to see how it was affecting my mother's health. Rightly or wrongly, I confronted Joan, stating that it was unfair to continue expecting my mother to run around after her, and that she needed to ask someone else for assistance. Unsurprisingly, Joan did not take this criticism well. However, the friendship continued, and my mother was able to get the well-deserved rest she needed. Fast forward to after the COVID lockdown, during which they had not seen each other. Their isolation was due to Joan's age and my mother's health condition. In August 2021, my mother fell ill, and it took until mid-February 2022 to receive a diagnosis, which, sadly, came too late: colon cancer. I was 7 months pregnant at the time. My mother had surgery at the end of March, but on April 7 her wound burst open. Community nurses came to assist her. I ended up giving birth during the night. To clarify, I was at the hospital, and the next day, my mother was taken back to the hospital. I was not permitted to visit due to COVID regulations. My mother arranged for a small buffet to entice Joan to visit, but she insisted on going to Joan's house instead. My partner drove my 2-month-old daughter and me to visit. My mother managed to stay awake for half an hour before falling asleep on Joan's couch. Sorry for deviating from the main topic. My mother ended up in respite care, from which she never returned home. Joan did not visit her during that time. When my mother was back in the hospital, Joan only visited her once. I was not allowed to enter, as visiting hours had ended, and only 2 people were allowed at that point. My mother passed away in August of that year, and my daughter was 4 months old. Joan was picked up for the funeral by my partner, and she took an unusually long time to exit her home, causing me to worry whether they would arrive in time. When she did arrive, she was wearing a pair of leggings and a t-shirt with a cat design. The only appropriate aspect of her outfit was that it was black. After the funeral, she stayed for half a cup of coffee and then requested to be taken home. That Christmas went as usual, but the following Christmas, when I reached out to her about when she would like to be picked up for Christmas dinner, she simply said, "Oh, sorry, my friend is coming down." While that was fine, she could have informed us about her change of plans sooner, right? The actual story begins here. In September of last year, we received a call from Joan's friend, informing us that Joan had been hospitalized for the past month. I had spoken with her via Messenger, and she had not mentioned anything. Joan's friend had to plead with her to let us know, as she needed to return to Scotland and was also responsible for caring for her elderly mother, who was in her 90s. We visited Joan when we could and took care of her animals. We had previously assisted her when she was ill at home. We were happy to help. I could take time off work, as I had just been on leave. We took her dog to our house so he would not have to be alone. We did this for a week while Joan's friend went back to Scotland for appointments. We did not receive any thanks from Joan. In January, I have been reflecting on this situation, and I still do not know if I am in the wrong or not. Joan called my sister, who was upstairs, at 4:17 p.m. My sister came down and said that Joan wasn't well and needed help with her animals. I told her we could not help at that moment as my daughter was also unwell. I was literally stuck, as she had fallen asleep on me. My sister said, "Daughter's name, 2F, isn't well," and then Joan abruptly hung up. Earlier during the phone call, Joan had mentioned to my sister that her friend in Scotland was ill, due to food poisoning, and could not assist, and the neighbor said her daughter, who is 13 years old, was also unwell. Am I the antagonist for not calling her back? Joan did not even inquire about what was wrong with my daughter. For all she knew, we could have been on the verge of taking her to the hospital. Thankfully we were not. I feel like we were her last resort. My partner has never felt comfortable around Joan but accompanied me to help. She constantly asked my partner, who suffers from a bad back, to do jobs for her, of which she did not purchase half the materials, nor did she pay him or even offer any compensation. He probably would not have accepted it regardless. I forgot to mention that Joan once paid him with a meal at a pub. My partner and I were there too, that he had to drive her and us too. My partner isn't really interested in food, so it was not even a treat for him. However, she would pay someone else $90 to mow her front and back gardens. The only times in the past year that she has contacted me have been about her needs or requests. I had called her a couple of times and sent her messages. I had apologized for not communicating as frequently as I would have liked, and she seemed okay with it. You know how overwhelming it is to juggle raising a toddler, work, and nursery. I often thought, I should call Joan, only to forget and it would be a week later. Indeed, I may be at fault regarding communication, but phones work both ways. So, am I wrong, or should I feel guilty for going no contact with someone who has been a family friend for approximately 26 years after she hung up on us? Story 2. After 3 weeks away, I returned to a filthy house and no groceries. My husband sarcastically said, "I can't wait to be the one who ends up cooking it all," then shut down. When I expressed my hurt, he dismissed my disabilities as excuses. After his apology, I still feel lost. Do I have to forgive him? Hello, Reddit. I am currently learning about relationships and reevaluating the relationship I have been in for 14 years, and I could really use some outside opinions. Summary: I returned home after 3 weeks away to find a messy house and no groceries, but I did not criticize my husband. While planning meals, he made a sarcastic remark about having to cook and then shut down. When I addressed this, he dismissed me, stated I do basically nothing around the house, and referred to my struggles with disabilities as excuses. I ended up in tears, and although he later apologized, I still feel very hurt. Do I have to forgive him? Full context: a couple of days ago, my husband and I had an argument. I had just returned from spending 3 weeks with a friend for whom I also do work. Upon arriving home after 3 weeks, I noticed that groceries had not been picked up or ordered at all. The pantry contained only bare essentials like a few cans of sparkling water and dry ramen. None of the usual meals or snacks were available. The only items in the refrigerator were lettuce, cucumber, and bok choy I had purchased before leaving, all of which had begun to spoil, as well as a container of tuna salad my husband had made and been scooping out for sandwiches. The kitchen was exceptionally messy. A salad spinner that I had used before my departure had been left out on the counter and was starting to collect mold. The counters were covered in residue, and nearly all the dishes were left used on the counter. I did not mention anything to my husband about this. I refrained from criticizing or making any rude comments, even though it was obvious he had been neglecting the kitchen, groceries, and chores while I was away. I also understood that being on his own was likely difficult for his mental health. On the first night after I returned, I was exhausted from traveling and asked him to feed the cat that evening. The jet lag hit me very hard, even though I usually handle it well, and I felt dizzy. I just wanted to spend the evening zoning out until bedtime. The following day, I created a grocery order online. I have struggled in the past with grocery orders because I had a challenging childhood where I was not taught meal planning or anything of that nature, but I dedicated considerable time thinking about the meals I would be preparing and cross-checking the brands I was buying to ensure they were locally made and that I was not inadvertently supporting companies I morally oppose. For some reason, online grocery ordering does not work on my computer, which makes it particularly frustrating, but I utilized my phone to complete the entire order. Usually, I put together the grocery order, and my husband double-checks it because the site functions properly on his computer, making it easy for him to verify deals. I informed him that the order was ready for review and completion, and I expressed my excitement to cook after spending time with my friend, who is an excellent and clever chef. Watching my friend plan meals and cook inspired me to prepare my own meals at home. After I finished raving about the new products I had discovered and the meals I planned to make, my husband muttered, "Yeah, I cannot wait to be the one who ends up cooking it all," in a very sarcastic tone. I was somewhat taken aback but did not want to incite a fight, so I said something else to keep the conversation flowing. However, my husband shut down and ceased talking to me entirely. I then went into another room to do some work while he addressed his tasks. A little while later, he came into the office to ask if I wanted to play some Magic: The Gathering. I expressed my interest but indicated that I wanted to discuss what had happened earlier first. He seemed genuinely shocked when I told him that I was hurt by his comment and that I disliked how he had stopped communicating with me, explaining that it made me feel dismissed. He firmly reiterated his comment about cooking, stating that the last time I had arranged a grocery order, he ended up preparing most of the meals, which did not meet his expectations. In response to my feelings of being dismissed, he asserted that I had been dismissed because he wanted to concentrate on something else. I attempted to explain that I did not appreciate the negative tone and found it quite discouraging, but he maintained that he was merely expressing his feelings and that his emotions were not meant to hurt me. I told him that if he was not going to acknowledge all the effort I had put into preparing meals, I would empty the cart, and he could handle it himself. He retorted that I did practically nothing around the house and that if I did not take charge of meal planning, he would be extremely upset. I reminded him that I struggle with physical and mental disabilities that sometimes flare up, making it very challenging for me to maintain energy and motivation for cleaning. He dismissed that as simply an excuse. He brought up the fact that I had asked him to feed the cat the previous night, and I reminded him that I had just returned from 14 hours of travel, feeling dizzy and fatigued. He repeatedly insisted, "But you could have done it if you wanted to," which was true, but I reminded him of my exhaustion that night. He continued asking, "But you could have done it," until I finally conceded that I could have fed the cat the night before but had chosen to ask him instead. He told me to stop making excuses for myself, and by this point, I was in tears, so I left to sit at my computer. Hours later, my husband called me over and apologized for his behavior. He acknowledged that he had not acted rationally and had not treated me well. I recognized that he apologized, but I was genuinely hurt by his words. I have been making a concerted effort to improve my ability to maintain the house, including cleaning and cooking, among other responsibilities. I was not raised in a stable environment, so I am learning proper self-care at an embarrassingly late stage in my life. Additionally, I have been grappling with chronic illnesses and disabilities that have intensified over the past couple of years, with the last 2 years being particularly difficult for my health. I admit that I have not excelled at keeping the space tidy. That argument occurred just over a week ago, and I still feel quite upset about it. My husband left for a long weekend with a friend, and my best friend came over to assist me in getting the house back in order. I was completely overwhelmed by the condition of the house, especially the dirty kitchen, and I am so grateful to have someone who could come over to literally help me while they cleaned, while all I could do was cry. I know he apologized, but I was deeply hurt by the way he treated me, and it feels like this is just another instance in a long history of mistreatment. Do I have to forgive him? And if I do not have to, what should I do with this feeling? Thank you for reading.